Well, Ruth, it is a privilege to have you on our show today. I look forward to learning from you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I just love that you talk about the intersection of technology and theology. You know what I mean? Like, how do we view theology and tech together? Let me ask you this: COVID is a crazy time. We are on our phones way too much. What have you learned about how often people are on their phones these days?
Oh man, well, pre-COVID, we were already checking our phones at least 12 times every 12 minutes. For some people, it was up to 4 times every 4 minutes. Sorry. Now with COVID, the results, Forbes did a study in many different markets. It came out in April, so that's only a month really into our isolation, and our use was 61% up over normal. And with Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, our messaging had increased by 50%. Which isn't super surprising, but it's definitely up.
Well, I mean, you can sort of understand it. Like you say, we're in isolation and we want to connect to community, right? That's actually part of the way we're designed. So, for those in countries that have this resource, is it a plus? Is it a minus? What do you think quickly?
Um, I, well, that's a really big question. I think it's a
Yeah.
plus because for some of us who are living on our own, it's our only contact with community. But I think that's why we have to learn how to moderate it because otherwise it can get really overwhelming. But it is our only outside source of the world.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm thankful for it right now because I get to talk to you. But I love your work on just what does God say about technology? And you actually had a moment in your life where you stopped and realized you hadn't asked that question, right? Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Well, I was trying to figure out my own use with social media and why I was using it all the time. And I put a really big Bristol board on my wall and just was like, here's the problem. I can see all the ways that my Facebook is wrestling and my Instagram, and I'm struggling with my phone use. And I looked at it for weeks and was like, God, where are you in this problem? I can't see you. And it wasn't until I read From the Garden to the City by John Dyer, which was a really helpful book. And he walked through the theology of God and technology and how they come together. And I realized he really cares about technology. He uses it and often on the cutting edge, which I just hadn't thought of before.
Well, there's a thought. God uses technology. Help us understand that. What does that look like?
Well, from the very beginning, if we look at creation, when God was creating the world, he was using his language, and language is a type of technology. So he was using his words to program the world. He was saying, let there be light, let there be water. And so we know coders, they use language to program an app or to program a website. So right from the very beginning, he was doing that. And then he created Adam and Eve, and we're created in his image, and we're also creators. And unfortunately, we had to leave the garden. And in the process of that, we created clothing for ourselves. We invented clothing. And in that creation, we made it out of leaves. And God said he had to get us to leave the garden, but he said, you know what, I'm going to bless that. And I want to give you some notes. Like, let's make that into skin instead of leaves. Let's make that a little bit more durable. And so in that process, he blessed our innovation. He blessed our creativity. He blessed our technology. And he said, I want to participate, which I just think is so cool.
I have never heard that take on it before. That is so interesting, but I'm so with you. Like, our God is a creator and we're made in his image. And we're made to create. And I do think that he communicates to us in so many ways. And that was just such a refreshing thought. I mean, you also talked to us about that technology is a tool, which we all understand that it's a tool, and we wrestle with how to use this tool. But you also say that technology is a value set. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I used to think, until very recently, I thought technology was neutral. So if I use it for good, it was good. If I use it for bad, it was bad. But what I realized is when I choose to use a piece of technology, I'm choosing to align myself to that value system. So when I use my GPS, I'm choosing to not think critically about where I'm going. When I use Instagram, I'm choosing to show value in my image and my creative portrayal. And I'm choosing to put value on the likes and the messages that I get from there.
Wow, I have never thought of it that way, that when I engage in Google, it's a value system. Do you know, I used to be a really good map reader, and now I don't know if I can read a map
I
because,
know.
right? Like, it's changed the way I'm thinking. But this whole idea that really our values are reflected in the tools that we use. and vice versa. I think that's a really great challenge for Christians. Can you talk to us then practically about, we have this problem of we want to be in relationship and connection, and you've already pointed out many times in your teaching that this lack of presence that we have with people. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's an important reminder for all of us.
So if we understand that our devices and our tools have values to them, I think it's important to know what God's values are, and then we overlay them together. So if I know that God values presence and he values dependence, I need to bring that into how I use my technology. And I need to look at my behavior when I use my device or my tools or my apps. What's the behavior over time? And is that pushing me to God? And am I reflecting God's values and becoming more Christ-like? Or am I becoming more independent, less Christ-like, and not following Christ's values? And that's really the question that I use when I'm figuring out my use of my devices and my tools.
That's so good. And what about the people around us, like families? Now, we're spending a lot of time together, but we could miss our people because we're sucked into our technology. Tell us about that.
It's so easy because it's a release. It's sometimes there's a lot of emotions going on and you don't have the energy for that. But that's not like the fruit of the Spirit talks about being full of joy and love and having patience, which is also long suffering, and having a faithfulness. And so when we accidentally just click onto our phones, we're not modeling faithfulness or long suffering with our families in work meetings. That's not the reality of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's so true that you look socially, right? We can be with people and yet sucked into our phone. And maybe we hide behind our phones with that, don't you think?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
definitely do.
What questions should we ask ourselves in accordance to social media use then? You've talked about reflecting the values of God, and that is this drawing us to God. Is there any more that you could tell us about that?
I would say that's the big question. And then after that, you start to think, what problem is this solving and how can I use it in a way that still helps me? Because I don't think the answer is to remove it. I think that especially now we need it, but it's how can I use it in a way that still glorifies God, honors God, and I can use God's values, but it doesn't pull me from him entirely.
Yeah, I think that's so good, because anything that takes us away from relationship with God and connection to God, it robs us, doesn't it? So it doesn't matter whether it's, our entertainment world or our social media use or even relationships. We have to be fully engaged and in tune with God. So, and I agree with you. I think the right use of this tool and the right value set in our hearts will enable us to use this in a way that honors God. Let me ask you this. What are some ways we can use social media while making sure it aligns then with ours and God's values? Just some really practical ideas here.
Well, very simply, monitor what you're intaking. You can watch what you're feeding, because God says talk about or dwell in what's life-giving, what's pure, what's honorable, what's not going to provoke you into conceitedness or envy. So pay attention to that. But I think right now there's also an importance in exposing ourselves to the right voices. There's a lot of really important voices right now that are coming out, and we need to be listening to that and leaning into some discomfort, not hiding from it. But then what I do is monitor how much I'm using it. So I need to be exposed, but I'm not going to expose myself 24/7, because I still want to have Christ's view when I look at my Instagram and not be overwhelmed by the world when I use my tools.
I really appreciate that. And I know a conviction I have in my own life is, how am I contributing on social media? How am I using my voice in a way that glorifies God?
Mm-hmm.
So I really thank you, Ruth, for these great reminders. You've just made us go deeper into our theology about how God uses social media. So thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.